I put a spell on you. Welcome, ladies. We wish. It's probably like 3 random guys that listen to this, but welcome to us anyways.
Right. So Huey, Dewey, and Louie, welcoming once again. All right. So this is the Bunny Rabbit's Hole, and we, of course, are the 2 hosts of the Bunny Rabbit's Hole. This is.
I am Craig.
And I'm Jason. And what we do here at the Bunny Rabbit's Hole, if you've never been here before, is what we do is we pick one central theme each and every week. We discuss that theme until something that each one of us say, or one of us say, or both of us say, that inspires us to talk about something completely different. We go down that little rabbit's hole for a little bit until finally Craig goes, hey, you know what? I forgot what the fucking theme was. Can we go back to it, please? And then we go back to the main theme.
Right. And as Jason says, when we pick our topic, we try to research it for at least a week and research both sides of it, not just what fits our narrative. But this is also for entertainment purposes, so we also include our opinions. And our opinions can be sometimes out there, so if you're easily offended, we don't care.
Right. And I just want to piggyback on that real quick, because this is season 3 of the Bunny Rabbit's Hole. In season 2, we really got opinionated. Okay? So we're going to curb back some of those specific opinions about a specific topic that's generally considered taboo. Okay, we're not going to talk about that one, but fuck religion. We're still going to talk about that.
Right. Because, which is a great segue into what tonight is about.
Exactly. You can't not talk about religion in this episode.
Right. So last week we did part 1 of our voodoo series, and this is probably the final part to it, part 2, which is we're going to talk about some of the voodoo priests and priestess, and then how it goes into pop culture. And we'll start with, we're just going to talk about like Dr. John, the 2 most famous ones, Dr. John and Marie Laveau.
Okay.
Marie Laveau.
Yeah, and we're going to just stick to those 2. I know there's a lot more that are famous ones. There's a lot of infamous ones that are out there, but we're going to center around New Orleans voodoo when we do this. We are an American-based podcast. It's not like we're American-centric or anything. It's just we felt that these are 2 of the most charismatic characters, and then they inspired so much more pop culture between the 2 of them. The one taught the other, which we'll learn later.
Right. Well, not only that, but it is basically these 2 are the root of. I mean, they're not the ones that brought voodoo, but they're the ones that turned it into what it was at the time. They
making scheme.
Right. They turned this into a religion. They turned it into so much more. And we'll start with Dr. John because, he was the first.
Yes.
And Dr. John was an African-American man born in Senegal in the late 1800s, 1700s, I believe.
Yes.
And he was...
Well, he claimed to be a prince from Senegal. Well, we'll throw that out there beforehand.
Yeah, he claimed a lot of things.
Right. But if you're going to say he's from Senegal, you might as well just go out there with the big one. He claimed to be a prince from Senegal.
Right.
But
then...
Go ahead.
But then he got captured and enslaved.
Yeah, the Spaniards captured him and sent him to Cuba as a slave.
Yes.
So I don't know how many royal families or members of royal families that get pulled out of their, castle, their, whatever, ripped from their title and given the moniker slave.
Right. And
except for maybe Moses.
What's interesting about that, though, is, the talk about him was he was a very charismatic person, and that's something that a member of royalty would have.
Right.
And he had a very entrepreneurial spirit.
Yes, he did. And there's a whole litany of things that he did that do that. So he was a big dude.
Yes.
Can't underestimate the fact that not only was he this massive voodoo priest that we'll go into in a minute, but he was a big dude, which in slave trade, meaning that he was a huge price
Right.
was spent on him.
Right. Because he's considered a workhorse, which is
Yes.
odd because he became a cook.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, he was sent to Cuba where he became a cook, and going back to being the charismatic person he was a cook and then convinced his master to free him.
Right.
Now,
Well,
somebody paid a lot of money. I mean, if my television said, you know what, I'm a really good television, you watch me all the time, why don't you just let me go? I'm going to say no.
Right. Well, before we get too much into the Cuba thing, though, we have to talk about the boat trip to Cuba.
Oh, go ahead.
Because while he was on this boat trip, it was discovered by the people that owned it and the people that he was with that he had certain gifts. Mm-hmm. He had basically the gifts of foretelling futures, and he would read people's futures for them, the slaves and stuff on the boat.
This is interesting because I didn't find any of this part. I only found post-Cuba.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was, let's see if I can pull it up here. Like on Occult World is where I found most of it.
Uh-huh.
Did you go to occultworld.com?
Yes, I did. Maybe I missed that part then.
That was one. Then there was another one at kitperrimanthehill.com. And this is, I think, where I found that stuff. But what they called them were Obi powers. Oh. And he began telling fortunes and stuff while he was on that, and people started seeing his skill at it. And then the interesting thing is, while he was in Cuba, I think I read somewhere that he was trained to be a chef by a West Indian man.
So he's like making curry and stuff like that in Cuba.
Possibly. Maybe he was maybe that's where gumbo came from.
Cuba's known for like Cubano sandwiches, ham and pickles and mustard, not curry. But hey, that's cool. Continue.
Actually,
I'm interested.
I want one of those sandwiches now.
A Cubano is awesome. Actually, if you've ever seen the movie Chef with Jon Favreau,
yeah,
that's the main dish that they cook in his thing. But the marinade that they create for the pork, is
yeah. So while in Cuba, like you said, he convinced his owners to set him free, and so he traveled back to Senegal.
Yes.
And while in Senegal, he didn't feel like he belonged there anymore.
No. So this is the part that I thought was interesting, because he goes back to Senegal and he's supposedly a prince, okay? But he doesn't feel like he belongs there. Is that because there was no more royal family? There was no more title?
It's gotta be, well, if you think about the time frame, though, I mean, back then, Africa, after the Berlin Convention, was split up between all the European nations, and they all owned part of Africa. I mean, you heard some of the atrocities that King Leopold from Belgium did in the Congo, you'd be just flabbergasted. But,
I'm glad that you brought that up. Just a minor segue is the huge amount of the American slave trade is obviously a black stain on American society. Okay, in American history, it's a bad section. It's a bad thing to talk about. We had a war over it, where North and South fought. But what they did in Northern Africa and through the Congo with the slave trade that was happening there was tenfold what was going on here. They were capturing Europeans and forcing them into slavery. I mean, anybody that they didn't like was sent down there to work forced to be a slave. There were 10 times the amount of slaves in these northern African countries, North and Western African countries, than there ever were in America at the same time.
Right. Like one of the things that King Leopold would do is he would give what he called his controllers, which were people that he had herding the slaves, like their cattle, And if he didn't think they were being productive enough, he would make them cut their hands off.
Mm.
He would take an entire village and enslave them and starve them to death, make them work to the death.
Yeah.
You know, this is the shit that was going on back then. So maybe going back to Senegal, maybe his entire family was enslaved.
Okay, that's if he was a prince and he was enslaved and sent to Cuba, maybe that he was the lucky one.
Right.
So, but you're right. He did not feel at home there and jumped a ship and ended up in Nolens.
Right. And I want to take a little bunny rabbit's hole here. If you guys
I've
ever
taken
get
4 already.
Right. If you guys ever get the chance, go on YouTube and look up tasting chocolate for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And what you'll see is this African man who owns a cocoa bean farm and works the cocoa bean farm with his employees. And this other African comes in and, he's asking, well, what are your cocoa beans? What do they make out of your cocoa beans? He's like, I don't know. And then like one of his employees has said, I think it goes in wine and it comes back in wine. And so he brings out a candy bar and has them all taste it. I mean, these people are in their 40s, 50s, never tasted chocolate before in their life.
And they've been doing beans their whole life.
Yep. And here is the abject reality of what them colonizing all those countries in Africa did to them and how far it put them back. To this day, these people, this guy who owns this cocoa bean farm makes €7 a day to support his family of 15 plus all of his employees. And a candy bar, a chocolate bar in Africa costs €2. So it's not something they can splurge on.
And he makes 7 a day.
Right. And he's got to split that between his family and take care of everything else. So it's keep them poor, keep them stupid, don't let them know what this is being used for, right. So they don't know the value of the product that they're farming for us. So therefore,
they can't charge more.
Right. And that's an after effect of colonization.
Right.
So anyways.
And to your point, I just want to point out the fact that this is a recent video.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I think it was
since YouTube was created, this video was created. It was just a few years ago.
Yeah. And it's, to me, I watched that because, like, my last class that I just finished up was history of the last 500 years.
Mm.
And my instructor, because I wrote my paper on matriarchal societies.
Right.
And obviously those stem a lot from Africa because the slaves were a matriarchal society too. And now a lot of African-American homes, the mother's in charge.
Oh, right.
I mean, look back to when we were kids watching the Cosby Show. Yeah, Bill Cosby tried to act like he was in charge, but every person in that house was terrified of Claire.
Exactly. That is great. Give us the chocolate cake.
Yep. All right. So, anyways, back to Dr. John.
Rapist.
Right. So
anyway, back to Dr. John.
Yeah, not like in Senegal too much. He hops on a boat, travels his weary way all the way to Nolens. Did I get it right that time?
Pretty damn close.
All right. And once he gets to Nolens, he starts because again on this ship too as well, he was telling fortunes for people, showing his Obi powers.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but he also had a way with women. Wasn't he married to like 15 women at one point?
Yes, he had 15 wives.
Yep. And so
more than 50 children.
Right. But again, entrepreneurial spirit, so he's making money telling fortunes, and he turns that into a lucrative career.
Yeah, but when he first got to New Orleans, he was working on the docks as a cotton roller.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
And, so he started with humble beginnings and then built. So when he got to New Orleans, he was, he had nothing really.
Right.
And he turns this into having something that we're talking about today.
Right.
A former Cuban slave from Senegal is something that 140 years later, we're still talking about him today.
Right. I mean, at one point, I think I saw something where he had amassed wealth around $50,000, which to us seems like nothing, but back then it's the equivalent of like $5 billion.
Well, yeah, I actually saw it was he actually there's a we can talk about it later, but there's a legend that he buried 150 grand somewhere on his property
Right.
because he didn't trust banks.
Right. Unfortunately for Dr. John, his entrepreneurial spirit and his charisma did not turn into business sense.
No.
So he gets to Nolans and he's doing all this stuff. He's making money left and right. He's getting women left and right. And I believe he bought some of them. Some of them were his slaves.
So yeah, so he was a black man, and he had purchased a bunch of slaves. Some of them he actually turned into wives later.
Right.
Some, not all, some.
Yeah. And so the horrible thing is around the end of his life, he was broke, penniless, and had to move in with one of his children.
Right. Right.
And he was ashamed of that because, I mean, it's the same as it would be for us today. Like, you know, if you're like, 40, 50 years old, you've had a lucrative career, all of a sudden it goes tits up and you're like, I got to move in with my kids because I got nowhere else to go. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, it's kids are homeless.
Right.
And it's the same too if, you or I had to move back in with our parents,
I've had to do it.
It's humbling.
Yep, it is very humbling. And it's being humbled is not a bad thing.
No, it's not. It helps you redirect and set your priorities.
Right.
But so at the height of Dr. John, so here is, I'm going to kind of play the other side of the coin. Okay, we kind of alluded to how he had the gift and he had this, but one of the things that Dr. John was really good at was telling the how did they put that? The thickly veiled white girls that came to him to find out if their spouses were cheating on them.
Right.
Now, did he have the gift, or was it the fact that he had this underground army of servants that brought information from anywhere and everywhere
right.
to him? So when they came, he knew the answer already.
Right.
So is that truly a gift, or was he just ingenious enough to use information? He, at this point, I'll say this though. Data is the number one most lucrative commodity on the planet right now.
Mm-hmm.
He learned this way back then, that information is what's going to make you money. And he had this whole army out there in all the brothels, in all the bars, taking notes and bringing all this information back to him. Now, the interesting thing about all this was they were taking notes and bringing this stuff back to him. Dr. John was illiterate.
Yeah.
He couldn't read or write.
Right.
And part of the reason that he ended up being destitute was he spent weeks learning how to write his name. One of his servants taught him how to write his own name, and then a con man got him to write that name on at the bottom of a piece of paper that turned out to be a contract, and he lost his home.
Right. Yeah, and something we probably should have mentioned at the beginning is Dr. John was also known as Bayou John and a couple of other things.
Yeah, and Jean Montague,
Yeah.
Montaigne, or something like that.
Mm.
I actually had Google say it to me like 3 times, and it said it like 3 different ways. So
right. But I mean, like, his house was filled with like snakes, reptiles, lizards, skulls from human cemeteries,
and scorpions.
Yeah.
Which aren't even native to New Orleans or Louisiana.
This I found really interesting. I'm going to talk about something that he did. one of his specialties was starting or stopping poltergeist
Yes.
activities.
Okay. I'm glad you brought this up. I love this
Yeah.
part. It's my favorite
And
story.
like usually showers of rocks or stones would fall on victims' homes, and like the cops are standing around like looking at it going, how the fuck is this happening? So they'd call in Dr. John, and he would like, okay, well, I'll do it for this amount of money. And
It was $62.
yeah. So he would get the $62, he would stop it. And then, you know, so this one guy, Samuel Wilson, he was pissed about it. So he took Dr. John to court to get the $62 back. And then a few days later, the rock started back up again.
The rock started again. Now, I don't know how he pulled that off. I don't know what happened, but that was my favorite story in all of it. It's like afterwards, the rock started again.
Yeah. There's another one I found on this other site. Let me find it here real quick. Go ahead and talk about something for a minute.
But one of the things, though, we have to mention about Dr. John was the fact that even at the height, when he was at the height of his wealth and his popularity, he never forgot his less than fortunate neighbors. So he was charitable. He gave out food to those that need it, and that was kind of helped the mystique and the lure of Dr. John was his charitable actions.
Yes, he took care of all the poor in his neighborhood, which is probably contributed to his losing his wealth.
Yeah.
But, you know, two sides of the same coin. I mean, he, you know, kind of fleeced people a bit, but yet he took care of people. He was like a Robin Hood, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know,
he
like
took from the thickly veiled white women, and then he gave back to his own community.
Like here's one is like he liked to take advantage of the gullible white women who came to him out of curiosity. One lady paid him $50 for a potion he later confessed was merely a few common herbs boiled in water. His rationale was, if folks want to give me $50, give me $50. I take the $50 every time.
Makes sense to me.
But wouldn't you? And wouldn't anybody? You know, somebody wants to give you $50 for something you have, and then even though you know it's not worth it, 9 out of 10 people are gonna be like, "Here you go."
Yeah.
I have a conscience. I would probably go, "How about 5?"
You know what? I tell you what, I'm gonna give you a discount today, just 25.
Right. But yeah, I mean, so, but this is where it gets really interesting, and this is where the cultures start to intermix because, you know, we brought up Marie Laveau at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. John actually trained Marie Laveau in the voodoo arts.
Yes. So Marie Laveau is probably more well known than Dr. John because of the name. Marie Laveau was also her daughter's name, who was also a voodoo priestess.
Right.
And so the name Marie Laveau is actually, you have to know, is it Marie Laveau the first or is it the daughter?
Right.
But a lot of the stories are intermingled, some are intertwined, some are, misconstrued for the wrong one. But
there's really no way for us to know, honestly.
Yeah. So Marie Laveau is probably the most iconic voodoo practitioner probably in the United States ever.
Right. Yeah, and
But,
see, like Dr. John, his skills were in fortune telling and healing and making gree-gree. You know, Marie took it to the next level.
yes. So she had the business sense.
Yes.
And not necessarily the business sense, she had the marketing.
Right. And here's, well, before we get into, let's give a little background on her. Like, she was believed to be born in 1794. Other records say 1801. But she was born the first freed member of her family.
Right.
You know, her mother was a slave, her grandmother was a slave, and they were able to buy their freedom. So she was actually born free. Her mother was African American. Her father was mulatto, and he was a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, so she grew up in a pretty well-to-do family.
Yeah, and so her mom was Marguerite and her dad was Charles. Now, it was actually illegal for the two of them to marry at this time in this
Right,
part of the in the South.
right,
A white man, even though he wasn't American, he was French, but he was a white guy. He was
right,
not allowed to marry a black woman who was a freed slave.
right. And her grandmother, Catherine, was purchased by a free woman of color and was eventually allowed to buy her freedom, and that's how her family started getting into, and the same thing I believe happened with her mother, and then,
Yes.
she was freed by being with the other dude. But in it, I think one thing that we forgot to mention last week was with New Orleans voodoo, the core value of that is protection.
Hmm.
It's not, I need to go get rich, I need love potions. It's to protect me from evil spirits, protect me from negative energy, protect me from all the bad.
Yes.
So, but yeah, and then, Marie, as she grew up, she dated some guy last name of Paris, who was also a wealthy man.
Oh, right.
And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she had two kids with him who both disappeared, and he disappeared as well, and they were all later reported dead.
Reported.
Reported.
So
And
she's like
before,
Carol. She's like the Carol Baskin from, Tiger King from years before.
I've never seen that.
Really, she like killed her first husband and fed him to tigers, but they can't prove it because the tigers. You can't really test DNA poop on tigers from 40 years ago.
Right. But yeah, so, she, before they even pronounced, they knew he was missing before they decided he was dead. She took on the moniker the Widow Paris.
Before he was dead.
Yes. Before it was reported, before everybody decided, okay, he's been gone for a couple of years, he's got to be dead. We're just going to report him dead. But then she had met up with another wealthy man, whose name I cannot recall at the moment. It wasn't Paris. It was another, and it was another one of those relationships where they could not marry because of race.
Because of the time.
Yep. And another interesting fact is Marie Laveau, throughout her life, owned 7 slaves.
I did know that. Which, okay. Before we like condemn two different black people for owning slaves, it was the time of history.
Mm-hmm.
And it is it right to own another person? No. Is it? But it was the time,
And at the sign of the time, it was a measure of
status.
status.
Yes. How many slaves you own was kind of an aristocrat thing. It's like, well, I own 4 slaves. I own 6. And then there's always that one freaky guy that says, well, I own 35. You don't even own a home, dude. You don't own shit.
Right.
You don't have all the GI Joes, okay? It's that kid. You don't have the entire. You don't own Snake Mountain and Castle Grayskull, okay?
Right.
You don't. No way.
There's a really interesting documentary on Netflix about the He-Man action figures.
Oh, the toys that made us.
Yep.
It's really funny.
Yeah, but yeah. So no, actually, it's not the toys that made us. I want to say it's the Power of Grayskull.
Oh.
It's totally centered on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe.
I am there.
Yeah, you gotta check it out.
I know what I'm doing tonight.
So Marie had, after the Paris dude, she had married another free black man for a while, and then that relationship broke up, and then she hooked up with this white guy named Christopher Glapion, and again they could not be married because he was white and she was mixed race.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, they saw her as black. She's
right.
mulatto. I mean, the portraits and stuff that you see online apparently do not do her justice because she was just a beautiful woman. And
right. Yeah.
you had a hard time telling what her race was.
Yeah, apparently she was pretty stunning.
Yeah, and she was very light skinned. So she gets with this Christopher Glapian guy, and so because like we said, interracial marriages were illegal, they became common law marriage.
Mm.
You know, basically common law marriages in some states, like if you live with somebody for 7 years, you're just considered married.
Yeah.
But yeah, she was devout Catholic all of her life.
Yes, she was.
She attended mass at St. Louis Cathedral. But she had, like Jason said earlier, she had a good business sense.
Mm-hmm.
So she opened up a hair salon, and this is where the stories start mixing between her and her daughter. Because some people say it was her daughter that ran the beauty salon. Some people say it was her. Some people say it was her daughter that ran it after Marie got to a certain age and wanted to continue to seem ageless, and her daughter, who looked just like her, took her spot.
Right. So that was a great thing, because it really, at the time, they were interchangeable. And when the daughter would step in certain circumstances, when they were younger, or when she was younger, and the daughter would take over and do the exact same things that the mom would do, but people would think, oh my God, she must know what she's doing, because she does not look over the age of 20.
Right.
Of course, the person they're looking at wasn't.
Right.
But the person that they thought they were was way older.
Right. So Marie would she was so talented at being a hairdresser that, at first, she was just dealing with, African American women's hair and stuff like that. A lot of them, work for, rich white people. And then they would go back, and then the rich white people would see how their hair was done. Like, well, they would start coming to see Marie. And it was either the people that worked for them or the white women. She had such a way that people would just open up to her and tell them all of her secrets and stuff like that. And that's where and again, we said this earlier, data, most, the
Most
biggest
lucrative
currency
thing on the planet.
Right. And so she would use that to increase her own wealth and standing. But mind you, I mean, again, just like Dr. John, there's two sides to the coin. She protected the people in her circle, in her neighborhood. She looked after the slaves. She looked after other people. She would go to the Congo Square. She led all the rituals and everything like that. And like, there's a story that I heard on YouTube where a guy was threatening somebody, and that was close to Marie, and Marie just came out and he was like saying, "What you can do?" And she just started dancing, and when she danced, it terrified people, because that's where they thought that her ritual magic came from, was her dance. And so they'd be like, "No, we're sorry," and then just run off.
Right.
Oh, there was one thing about Dr. John I kind of want to go back to.
The fact that he hated mulattoes.
Well, there's that. But
even though he had mulatto children, he despised mulattoes.
Yep.
Even though when he went to live with his daughter, or his kids, there was mulatto children there, but
right.
Anyway, go ahead.
Oh no, this isn't about Dr. John. This is like an example of some of the things that Marie would do.
Okay.
So a wealthy man's son was in jail for murder, and he was on trial. And so the wealthy man came to Marie and was saying, I will do anything, to, help get my son off. He's innocent. We need to get him off. So what she did is she spent 3 days, or actually, sorry, not 3 days, but she went through a week of self-torture, and she would do it in the St. Louis church. And one of the things that she would do is she took 3 hot guinea peppers, and she would hold them in her mouth for hours until the spirits would take pity on her great suffering. And then after doing this for a week, she snuck into the judge's quarters, or the courtroom, when nobody was there, and placed the peppers under the judge's desk. And the next day, when they had court, they set, he's like, oh, the man's innocent, let him go. But these are the type of rituals that people would come to Marie for. And this kind of created this whole mysterious, whatever, I can't think of the words, about Marie. She just became the queen priestess of voodoo. And she ran, basically nothing happened in New Orleans without Marie knowing about it. Did you catch that story?
Yes.
Had you heard that one?
Parts of it. I saw the YouTube version that gave like a Cliff's Notes version of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, could you imagine sitting there with 3 hot guinea peppers in your mouth for hours on end?
Right. Yeah.
How fucking painful.
Just the
I'm like,
willpower.
yeah. But that's where her legend came from, is that she would do things like this for the people that came to her for help.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this guy's kid probably did commit the murder and got free for it.
Right.
But would he have done it? Would he have gotten off it without Marie doing that? I mean, all she did was left the peppers under the judge's desk.
Yeah.
He didn't even know they were there, but that's
exactly. That the whole thing is mind blowing. Now, I'm gonna kind of skip ahead, but this is gonna kind of give an overview of how people really thought of her. In her obituary, the New York Times. Now, remember, this woman was from Louisiana. The New York Times said lawyers, legislators, planters, and merchants all came to pay their respects and to seek her office, meaning that everybody wanted a piece of this woman because what she could do for them, what they perceived that she could do for them.
Well, and if you look at, what we said last week about voodoo and voodoo priestess and stuff like that, and the kings and queens, she was the queen, and that gave her the highest political position in New Orleans at the time.
Yes.
I mean, she had more power than the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else in that town at the time. There was no touching her.
But there were some newspapers that tried to sensationalize and demonize what she was doing.
Oh, yes.
So, I'm just going to read this verbatim from this article. It says, racism and a natural tendency for newspapers to seek out sensationalized stories led to description of Marie Laveau's ceremonies as a cult, drunken orgies, and nicknamed her Voodoo Queen.
Right.
Now, we've talked about magic on a lot of these episodes.
Yes.
Now, with the exception of probably chaos magic, the one thing that all magic has is ritual.
Right.
And voodoo is no exception, and it may be the rule. Okay, other than probably the right-hand path, voodoo has got the most ritualized magic involved. It has ceremony, it has candles, it has, chicken is sacrifice, it's got all these things that people label as being a cult. But the one distinction I want to make and everybody to understand is that voodoo is not a cult.
No.
It is not. Voodoo is its own religion. That's something completely different. Okay. A cult is more, it's
a cult of mind control.
Right. Yes. So a cult has got specific focused personal goals that generally lead to some kind of discord for somebody else.
Right.
That's not voodoo.
No. And we talked about what Dr. John specialized in. He just specialized in a couple things. The stuff that Marie specialized in was people would come to her and seek advice on marital affairs, domestic disputes, judicial issues, childbearing, finances, health, and good luck. Mm-hmm. And also protection. And she would supply people with gree-gree or juju,
Mm-hmm.
And, this would be like your, bag of like spiritual stuff that you hold on to for protection and shit like that.
Yes.
Or like voodoo dolls are considered gree.
Yeah.
Most of that has been sensationalized. Like there was a book written about Marie Laveau by Robert Talent, and it was called Voodoo Queen. But he, again, and this was in like 1979, I believe, and he basically did like those newspaper did, sensationalize it. It's just these all these orgies and black magic and blood and sex and blah blah blah.
This has nothing to do with like Aleister Crowley's version of magic, where he's taking guys out into the desert and giving them so much peyote they have no idea what's going on, and he rapes them for 4 days, and then they end up in an insane asylum.
Right.
This is nothing like that. Okay, this has nothing to do with menstrual blood. It has nothing to do with scat play. I mean, this is just roll some chicken bones on a white sheet and pretend to read them.
Right. I mean, there's so many really, really interesting art stuff on Marie Laveau. You can look on YouTube. You can go like Ghost City Tours from New Orleans has a whole, obviously, Marie Laveau page because she's one of their big tourist attractions.
Yes.
Now, we talked about last week whether she was born in St. Louis tomb number 1 or number 2.
Right.
Now,
there are places, there's a specific tomb that people go there and leave an offering and write what they want on the tomb, and then if it comes to fruition, they come back and they write a smiley face and circle it next to it. But as our research found, is more than likely that's the daughter's tomb, not the mom's.
Right. And I think that's a good place to go into. These people were so famous in their time that they became infamous through history. Infamous. Right. And the stuff that they did, people remember Dr. John, but everybody remembers Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau has, her legend has gone on to create so much in today's pop culture.
Yeah.
I mean, she was in Marvel Comics in Dracula #2.
Yeah.
In 1973, she was in a Marvel Comics. She's been in other things. I mean, here's some. In 1999, there was a musical written about her called Marie Christine. I mean, there are so many songs written by her, and an interesting one. If you think about, if people think, oh yeah, I've heard the Marie Laveau song by Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, but the interesting thing about this one is that song was written by Shel Silverstein and Baxter Taylor. And if you don't know who Shel Silverstein is,
everybody knows where the sidewalk ends.
Right. He wrote that song with this Baxter Taylor.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I found that out today. I'm like, that's amazing. My wife's like, oh, holy shit.
But yeah, everybody knows where the sidewalk ends.
Right. And like even Jimmy Buffett wrote a song about her, and it was called Play for Gumbo.
Yeah, it's not that good, but yeah.
Well, it's Jimmy Buffett. It's not going to be that
good. Okay, I'll give you that.
All right. And so, but like another one was Voodoo Queen Marie by the Tao of Sound.
Oh.
But she's inspired so much. Francine Pose wrote a book called Marie Laveau. Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Yeah.
Marie Paris.
Oh, okay.
That's Charlene Harris, if you know the True Blood series, which is now the genre is called suburban fantasy. She is a role model for a lot of her characters in that True Blood series. I think she makes an appearance.
Oh. Yeah, she does in like season 3 or 4.
Yeah. And Rick Riordan, who we know from Percy Jackson and The Lightning Thief.
Okay.
Well, one of his books, The Heroes of Olympus, she's in there as Queen Marie.
Oh, wow.
You know, and that's just literature and songs.
Right.
And
She's a principal in part. She's a principal character in The Princess and the Frog, a
oh
Disney
yeah,
movie.
yeah. You know what I'm surprised by is I did not find, and I'm not sure, like, because I watched all but the last season of Supernatural is one of my favorite shows.
Uh huh.
I don't remember her. They did. I don't think they dealt with a lot of voodoo in
Oh,
Supernatural.
really?
Yeah. I mean, they did, like, the Winchester boys would do, like, theirs was more like religious based, like,
Hmm.
getting people or doing exorcisms and shit like that,
Right.
But yeah, I'm surprised she wasn't in that. But then she's in 2 seasons of American Horror Story.
2 seasons?
Yep, she was in Coven, and then again, and there's another season, Apocalypse.
Oh.
I haven't watched that one yet because I didn't know about that until today. And that's the 8th season. Yeah, and so hold on, I'm just gonna pop it up and read all that. Let's see, where does it say? They say it's a crossover between the first and third seasons of the series.
Hmm.
So, but like in American Horror, she was also portrayed in. You ever watched the show Lost Girl?
No, but I know what it is.
She was portrayed in that as well. I mean, she's made appearances in so much. Like
Wow.
in American Horror Story, Angela Bassett played her in. I mean,
Yeah,
she's an incredible actress, anyways.
exactly. She is.
But this is what I got into it because, like, I've never watched American Horror Story. I know it's a huge hit. Everybody watches it. I don't watch a lot of stuff. It's really got to appeal to me, or if it's something I'm doing for research. But I got into the series. I enjoyed it. I
Nice.
just watched that season, and that was it. But, it starts out back in Marie Laveau's time frame, and I can't remember the lady's name now. Madame Lola, who was actually tried as a serial killer for what she did to her slaves.
Oh, right, right. We talked about her.
Yep. Well, in American Horror Story, Madame Lola took Marie's lover and turned him into a minotaur.
Oh, okay.
Which I thought, well, that's an interesting twist.
Let's go from voodoo and Southern culture to instead of normally you would probably go with zombie, which would be more voodoo, but we're gonna go Greek mythology on this motherfucker.
Well, Madame Lola was a white woman from France, an aristocrat. So, but she dabbled in dark magic and would do just horrible, horrible things to her slaves. She had an entire attic, which was just a torture chamber.
I mean, most people know the name Bathory. Right. This was an American version of Bathory, even though she wasn't American, but she was. It all happened here.
Right. But but this season is, starts out with that, and so Marie basically makes her drink because she comes to Marie for a love potion to try to get her husband back because her husband is cheating on her with a slave that she pushed out like a third-story window and fell to her death. But because the slave had her husband's child, that's one of the other reasons.
Oh, okay.
But so she came to Marie for a potion. Marie gives her a potion, and she falls unconscious and basically wakes up in a box. Marie gave her a potion that made her immortal, and then buried her underground where she stayed for like 150 years.
Oh.
Before
when you came out of that.
Yep. And this is what made it interesting because the show itself was based around the Salem witches. The coven from Salem. They moved to New Orleans, and there was there was friction between voodoo and the witches.
Gotcha.
But this is also where you got to see Papa Legby too, because the actor that played Papa Legby in that was incredible. He did a great job. Legby, whatever his name is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I don't want to give away the entire series, but
Right.
it's worth a watch. I mean, there's like 13 episodes. All you people binge shit all the time, anyways. Just go binge it.
Right. And it's been out for a while, so fuck you.
Right. I'm not giving out any spoilers. It's been out for years, so.
Right.
But yeah, I mean,
but voodoo itself has actually influenced so much pop culture
oh yeah,
outside beyond
oh yeah,
these two. I mean, just the whole notion of the voodoo doll
yeah.
is inspired so much.
So many horror movies.
Yeah. You know, there's an episode of Teen Titans, Hellblazer, Superman. Then there was okay, so there's Marie Laveau in Spider-Man. There's a show called The Preacher. Wonder Woman back in 1942 had a voodoo doll. You know, so then there's the Marvel character Brother Voodoo, who actually collaborates with Doctor Strange and became the Sorcerer Supreme for a limited time, but he actually used voodoo dolls in a couple issues. So
Right.
So voodoo is something synonymous with horror, I would say.
Yep.
But mainly because it gave us two things. It gave us the voodoo doll and it gave us zombies.
Right.
Now, the first instance of a zombie was the movie White Zombie, which was from like 1942, 20. I have it here somewhere. Actually, sorry. The first instance was I Walked with a Zombie, which was in 43.
Okay.
And then White Zombie. Is that
when they're still silent?
Yes. White Zombie came out after that, but they're loosely based on the voodoo zombie. Then later we all know George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which changed the zombie. See, these first two movies were a voodoo ritual that changes somebody from being a just regular person into a mindless drone.
Right.
And that's, if you've ever seen Serpent and the Rainbow, this is the perfect example of what a voodoo zombie, a Haitian voodoo zombie is. It's they put this spell on them, and then next thing you know, you lose your soul, and you're now a slave to whoever holds your soul.
Right. Yeah. Now, that was the movie starring Bill Pullman.
Yes. Great movie. Wes Craven movie.
Yep.
But so zombie was this thing that was mainly a dark voodoo ritual that turned somebody from being a regular person into a soulless individual that was to do your bidding.
Right.
Okay. Now, when Wes Craven, or not Wes Craven, sorry, I have you in the rain. When George Romero came out, he's the one that changed the zombie from being this mindless drone, soulless mindless drone that's still technically living, to the corpses coming out of the ground.
Right.
And that forever changed the genre to what we know. You know, you have The Walking Dead, all the Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead's, Night of the Living Dead's remakes, you know, iZombie, Zombieland, you know, the countless zombie things. But that all came from George Romero's version of a zombie. So they're actually two separate things, even though we have to give props. And anytime you mention zombies, you have to give props to George Romero, because after they shot the movie, the script said one title and they changed the name to Night of the Living Dead. And then at that moment, he lost all creative rights and royalties to that movie. So the movie was released and he made no money for it.
Yeah, that's bullshit.
Yeah, it was quite
now. I mean, my favorite.
On a side, here's a bunny rabbit hole too.
Yep.
The reason that the Roseanne Barr show, Roseanne, got so fucked up crazy at the end of the first run before they rebooted it was the fact that she did not have creative control or creative rights to her show. because her name was not listed on the first script. Created by is only by the person who's on the first script. So her name was taken off of that for some reason, and she agreed to that, and then she lost creative control of the show from day one. So that's why they ended up winning the lottery, and Dan ends up dying, and all this other shit.
Right.
But anyway, that's just a public service announcement to make sure that you know and understand how the entertainment industry works.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, my favorite movie that touches on voodoo would be Angel Heart.
Great movie.
And this movie came out in 1987, starred Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, and Lisa Bonet. Lisa Bonet, we talked about Cosby earlier. She played his second oldest daughter.
And she's married to Aquaman now.
Yeah. At one point, she was married to Lenny Kravitz.
Yeah. And now they're best friends. And Aquaman, or Jason Momoa and Lenny Kravitz are best friends now. They're both married to the same woman. Yeah. It's a weird dynamic, but it works for all of them. So.
Right. So in this movie, Mickey Rourke plays a private detective, and this is Mickey Rourke before getting weird.
The facial change.
Yeah. And he's hired by this mysterious man named Louis Cypher.
Right.
Played by Robert De Niro, and leads him down this path of just unbelievable, mind-boggling shit, where at one point I think Mickey Rourke becomes possessed or something in this movie, and it is I haven't watched it in a long time, but I kind of want to watch it now again because I enjoyed it so much the first time. Plus, I mean, you do get to see Lisa Bonet naked in it.
Yeah, and to be honest, I have not seen that movie in probably 25 years.
Yeah, it's been about that long for me too. But I still remember seeing Lisa Bonet naked dancing with a snake.
Right.
Around a fire, because she played the voodoo character in that.
And Robert De Niro is only really in like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
Yep. And this was the movie that made Bill Cosby kick her off the Cosby Show.
Yes.
And cut her rights to everything in the Cosby Show because she got naked on camera while he's raping women.
But he's drugging and raping women at the same time.
Right. Because hypocrisy is not dead.
Exactly. Yes. But so voodoo has been one of those things that, I mean, it's been in Scooby-Doo, it's been in all the cartoons. Everybody knows the voodoo doll. Everybody jokes about like stabbing the voodoo doll in the neck. I gotcha. But it's been interesting these last couple weeks researching all this stuff and getting a full understanding on how it was created, how they got it to stay mainstream by incorporating parts of Catholicism, and then how some people turn it into a career.
Right. I mean, there's still gree shops in New Orleans today.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like you go and get your palm read, you can go in and get protection spells.
Yeah, and like we talked in the voodoo episode, there's a temple for voodoo spirituals.
Yes.
You know, and they still have the Congo Square. You know, all this stuff still exists today. Marie Laveau was also in Legends of Tomorrow, the DC show.
Oh.
She was in, she was in episode 7 of season 4, portrayed by Joyce Guy.
Nice.
You know, so I mean, she has made her rounds, and she will probably continue to make her rounds. Dr. John didn't live on as much. There are a bunch of characters like the WWE had a character that they called Papa Shango, who was basically a voodoo type guy, who later changed characters and became the Godfather, whose tagline was "Pimp It Ain't Easy."
Nice.
But they also had another guy. I want to say they just called him Voodoo, and he kind of walked around eating worms and shit. It was just really weird.
That is weird.
Yep. But that's the creative in WWE with the shit that they do. But but this just goes to show that the impact that New Orleans voodoo has had on the entire American culture.
You know, it's just as American as apple pie, hot dogs, and baseball.
Right. And been around longer.
And longer than all of them, yeah.
Yeah. Except for maybe apple pie.
Yeah.
But I mean, but and the sad thing is that yeah, I've always known about voodoo and stuff like that, but I never knew about Marie Laveau. I never knew about Dr. John, even though I've seen them in all these things. And granted, I knew about Marie Laveau before I watched American Horror Story.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about Marie Laveau doing our research for it. And I just got to say Marie Laveau one more time because I've said it like 16 times.
I'd heard the name Marie Laveau, but I didn't really know about the allure. I didn't know the pop culture phenomenon that she became. I didn't understand how powerful New Orleans voodoo was. I always thought of, because I'm a huge fan of the movie Serpent and the Rainbow, and everything is always about Haitian voodoo.
Right.
And then you knew that there was New Orleans voodoo, but I didn't realize that two of the most central and prominent figures, I'll say three, because we'll say her daughter too.
Right.
Three of the most powerful, popular figures in the entire thing, in all of voodoo, were from New Orleans.
Right. Well, and if you look at it, every culture has some form of voodoo. Like
Mm-hmm.
down in Mexico and stuff, they have the natives have their own version of it. I don't know what it's called.
It's
but
like Santerini.
Santeria. Yep. I ain't got no sangria. I ain't got no crystal ball.
Because I'm missing his name right now. Adolfo Constanzo.
Yes, we talked about it a little bit last week.
Yeah, he worked for the Mexican cartels, and he'd put protection spells on them. But the version that he did was very perverted, and he was actually doing human sacrifices and then doing these rituals with a cauldron where he'd put body parts. And this went on for a long time until he made the mistake of killing an American.
Right.
And then he was an American college student, and these kids, and one of them was the son of a senator that was a friend of the kid that was looking for him. So it became pretty big news. And then they hunted this man down, and they found his remains there. So that's how Adolfo Constanzo got. But not all of these things are like, you could almost say Adolfo's was occultist, because that was black magic that he was performing there.
Right. Well, and that's what most people contribute voodoo to, is black magic.
Right. Which
in reality it is not.
Exactly, it's not.
But like any religion, you can twist it, and there's a dark side to it.
And yeah, because as a society and as humans, we mock what we don't understand.
Right. And I've got a story for you from when I was younger. Not that I've experienced voodoo, I haven't. But when I was 18 years old, moved out, I was closing manager at Burger King, and I got an apartment with a guy I worked with there who at the time was 30, and he was an African American guy from Detroit. So we lived together for quite a while, and I made the mistake of bringing up, or he was freaked out about somebody. I'm like, what is wrong there? I'm like, you gotta watch her. I'm like, why? He's like, she'll put a root on your ass. I'm like, what are you talking about? He was terrified of voodoo. And he's from Detroit.
Wow.
I mean, his dad was an actual pimp.
Okay.
And so the fact that something like that terrified somebody like that.
Right.
In the 90s.
Hexes and protection, or protections, are real.
Yeah, and he was a religious person. I think he was like Baptist or something like that. But that doesn't really matter. But the fact that he believed it exists,
right.
And he was, and so like at the time I was 18, he was 30, so he's like 12 years older than me. So he was probably born in like 1960.
Mm-hmm.
So, but raised in the inner city Detroit in the ghetto, and you know, you see some weird shit in the ghetto. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
I mean, you see some weird shit everywhere, really, anymore. But you know, it's a different culture, it's a different lifestyle, and there's different fears.
It's it's definitely, and like I said, we mock what we don't understand, but we are terrified of, you know, those things that grandma told you.
Yes.
And so these notions of these voodoo, or you know, the spirits, and you know, the spirit world, and ghosts, and black-eyed children, and you know, Slender Man, and you know, anything else that could be passed down, you know, gets rooted into our psyche.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and
a lot of our beliefs are built when we're children.
Right. I mean, I can't tell you, like, after watching Friday the 13th as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
Kevin Bacon's laying on that bed, and the hand comes up underneath the bed, clamps his forehead down, and an arrow comes up through his throat.
Through his throat.
For years, I could not go to bed without looking under my bed first.
To see if Jason's mom's under there.
Yep. I mean, that terrified me, you know, and Poltergeist, same thing, the clown under the bed.
The clown got me.
You know, and it's just, but these are things that develop as, you know, we're growing, and we see this stuff, and it scares us because we watch these movies that glorify and sensationalize it,
Mm-hmm.
and take it completely out of context, you know,
Right.
and that becomes our belief system.
You're right. And you and I watched a lot of twisted movies at an inappropriate age.
Yeah.
So watching movies, you know, black magic movies like Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things and stuff like that, where the whole purpose of the movie was to do an occult ritual to raise a corpse back from the dead.
Right.
And then it goes bad from there.
Right.
But, you know.
Imagine that.
Yeah, weird. If it went right, that would have been a boring movie.
Right.
But, you know, so we learned a lot of that shit when we were young, but at the same time, doing it together, we also learned how to mock it.
Right.
So we were I think if we did it individually, we'd probably be pretty fucked up.
Right.
But collectively, you know, you and I and our brothers watched all this shit together, and then a twisted, sick fuck way of working our brains happened to be at the time.
Yep.
We found humor in all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so through humor, we rationalized, you know, the sadistic bullshit that we're actually seeing on the screen. You know, I tell the story a lot when, and we've told a few times on here about your mom talking about how horrified she was of seeing Night of the Living Dead, and how she had to sleep with the light on for a week. You know, I was so worked up when we finally got to watch that movie. Then when the dude said, "They're coming to get you, Barbara," at the beginning, I busted out laughing.
Right.
You know, and then the rest of us were giggling throughout the rest of the movie, and it was pissing your mom off.
Yeah, I got slapped by my mom watching a horror movie. It was The Exorcist. The scene with the Virgin Mary where the things were, you know, the horns were poking out of her breasts and stuff. Yes. I again, it was our way of coping.
Yes.
You guys weren't there to help me. I was watching this alone with my mom. I started laughing all of a sudden, out of nowhere. Because I was laughing at the Virgin Mary and da-da-da.
Right.
Like, you're the one making me watch this.
Right.
I'm like, you gotta know how I'm gonna react. And I think that's where I developed my inappropriate times of laughter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because that's kind of how, and it's probably why I got my personality the way it is now, where uncomfortable situations, I make jokes and laugh.
I do too, and I'm numb to. I'll be completely honest. There's certain feelings that I'm numb to.
I wish I was.
But some of it's not good.
No.
Some things that I should be, should make me happy or ecstatic and stuff. It's just I'm kind of like flatline.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, and I know I'm that way, so I try to compensate.
Okay. Well, and again, goes back to self-awareness.
Yes.
So, anyways, to sum up tonight's episode, voodoo is a religion.
Yes.
It is not all black magic and orgies and snakes and fucking snakes or any of that other shit. I mean, sure, there's, like I said, there's a dark side to every religion,
Right.
But
if you wanted fucking snakes, you go to a little church in Kentucky.
Right. And, so we talked about Marie Laveau and Dr. John and how they transferred into today's pop culture.
Yes.
That about sums it up?
I think it does.
So, all of you wonderful people out there, if you'd like to hear more from us, hit the like and subscribe and the notification icon, because that's what everybody on YouTube says. But anyways, hey, shoot us an email. What's our email address, Jason?
It is bunnyrabbitshole@gmail.com.
Shoot us an email and tell us what you want to hear us talk about, because we want your input, and we want to know what you guys want to hear about. And we will, if we like what you send us, sometimes even if we don't like what you send us, we'll give it a shot.
We'll try it, and then we'll mention you on air.
Yep. All right. With that being said, I'm going to say peace out. Love you guys.
All right. Insert tagline here. Goodbye.